A young woman went out with a group of friends to celebrate her 20th birthday a few days early. They were college students and they went to a local bar to celebrate. About midnight, she wasn't feeling well and wanted to go home, but her friends weren't ready to leave quite yet, so a coworker offered to take her home. However, she would never arrive at her apartment, and she would never arrive at her parents' house a couple days later. Hi, I'm Mindy. Welcome to the Missing Link channel. Every unsolved mystery and missing person case is just one missing link away from being solved. Hit that subscribe button so you'll be notified of our future videos and help us find that missing link. This is a true crime story that has been solved, but it is one that should have never happened in the first place. This young woman should have made it back to her apartment. She should have made it to her parents' house a couple days later to celebrate her birthday. She should have graduated college, got married, and had a family of her own. Who was this young woman? Her name was Stephanie Schmidt. Her story is not one that I read about online or heard about on the news. This story hit close to home. Stephanie attended the same high school I did, Blue Valley North High School in Overland Park, Kansas. I even wore my alumni sweatshirt today that my cousin gave me. Stephanie was quite a few years older than I was, but her younger sister was a year above me in high school. Stephanie graduated from Blue Valley North in 1991. I remember seeing Stephanie when she was at work at the local Hy-Vee. We grew up just a few blocks from each other. I remember seeing her missing person flyers all over town. During her disappearance, my family and I were on a toll road, and when we approached the toll booth, I remember seeing Stephanie's missing person flyer. I can picture it very vividly. I remember looking at her picture and praying that she would be found safe and that she would be returned to her family. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case. Stephanie Renee Schmidt was born July 4th, 1973. She was born to Jean and Peggy Schmidt. Their family was complete when another little girl, Jenny, was born to their family a couple years later. They had a perfect family and a life that most people would dream of. Stephanie wrote in college that in her future, she wants to have a family exactly like the one that she grew up in. Stephanie had the best laugh. It was infectious. Stephanie had a very loving personality, and she was always there for her friends. Her friends describe her as happy, outgoing, caring, optimistic, humorous, and understanding. One of her friends stated that it was difficult to find a friend like Stephanie and impossible to replace such a friend. Stephanie's sister Jenny stated, "My life got started out on a good note because Stephanie was my friend, my best friend." She remembers dancing to Sesame Street songs, racing on their big wheels, and playing on their swing set. She also tells a story of Stephanie and her sliding down the stairs on a baby mattress. Stephanie also taught Jenny an important lesson about shopping. Anytime you go to the mall, you have to buy something, even if it's just a cookie. She taught Jenny how to be a good friend. If anyone pushes you down, Stephanie would be there to pick you back up. Stephanie once wrote about life. "Life is the most important thing to me. It is necessary to get through life. There are so many kinds of love, and I feel fortunate to be as loved as I am." She also wrote about death. "One topic I could do without is death. Thinking about it makes me worry. I have had a hard time accepting death. Death makes me realize how much I value life, but more specifically, my parents, friends, family, and most of all, love. I try to treat everyone as if there is no tomorrow, because you never know if there is." Stephanie was very wise beyond her years. Let's go back. Wednesday, June 30th, 1993. Stephanie was 19 years old and was attending Pittsburgh State University in Pittsburgh, Kansas. This was less than 2 hours from home in Leawood, Kansas. She worked in a local restaurant while she was going to school, and her major was psychology. She was going back to Kansas City on the weekend to celebrate her birthday with her family. Her college work friends wanted to take her out to celebrate her birthday before she left town. They decided to go to a local bar on Wednesday night. Before going out that night, Stephanie called her parents. She told them that she had a sore throat, and they tried to convince her to stay home and take care of herself, but she didn't want to let her friends down. They were coming to pick her up soon. Stephanie and her parents always ended their phone conversations with the words, "I love you." They did this on that night as well. She would try to give them a call the next day, which was Thursday, but if not, she would see them on Friday between noon and 2 o'clock. Stephanie told her parents that she loved them, and Stephanie's parents told her the same, that they loved her. This is the last time that they would hear their daughter's voice. They are so thankful for this telephone conversation. They only wish they could have convinced her to stay home that night. Stephanie's work friends picked her up, and they headed to a bar called Bootleggers. Some of her friends were drinking. Stephanie's sister Jenny described these friends as her work friends or acquaintances. They weren't the normal friends that Stephanie hung out with. These friends also invited another person to attend the birthday celebration. His name was Donald Ray Gideon. I will never refer to his name in this video again. I will call him he, his, defendant, or monster, because that is what he truly is. Remember, Stephanie wasn't feeling well before she went out that night, and her friends picked her up, so she didn't have her car to drive herself home. Around midnight, Stephanie was ready to go home, so she asked these friends to take her home, but apparently they weren't ready to call it a night yet. I'll give you one guess what happened next. That monster offered to give Stephanie a ride home. Stephanie accepted. All she wanted to do was go home and go to bed. She had no idea that that decision would prove fatal. They walked out into the parking lot and got into his truck, and Stephanie disappeared. 2 days later, on July 2nd, Stephanie's parents were expecting her to come home any minute. They had already decorated her birthday tree in red, white, and blue. Remember, she was a 4th of July baby. Her dad, Gene, explains that in the first 3 or 4 years of Stephanie's life, he let her believe that all those fireworks were for her. They had already ordered her birthday cake, and there were presents and surprises waiting for her. They anxiously awaited for her to pull in the driveway and honk her horn. There was a storm with heavy rain and winds that afternoon, and Stephanie's mom was worried about her driving home in this weather. Stephanie didn't show up by noon, and then 2 o'clock passed as well. Remember, this was before a time when everyone had cell phones. Stephanie's parents began to worry that maybe she was still sick, and she hadn't even headed home yet. When Stephanie didn't answer the phone at her apartment, Stephanie's parents contacted a friend that lived in Pittsburgh. They asked him to go by her apartment and see if she was okay. When he got there, Stephanie was not in her apartment, but her car was still in the parking lot. Gene called the police to report his daughter missing. They knew something had to be wrong. Missing flyers went up everywhere, and so many people started looking for Stephanie. All things changed on Tuesday when that monster didn't show up to work. And because he was the last person to be known to be with Stephanie, he became suspect number 1. That is when the real secrets about him and his past came to light, and how Stephanie was failed by a faulty justice system. This 31-year-old monster was a convicted sex offender that was out on parole. But not only that, he should have still been in prison. He was sentenced to 20 years for the rape and sodomy of a young college student back in 1983. He was released November 5th, 1992, after only serving 10 years of his 20-year prison sentence. He had been denied parole at every one of his parole hearings, but for some reason, after 10 years, he came up upon a mandatory release. Why he would be up for a mandatory release after only serving 50% of his time is beyond me. He also supposedly completed a sexual offender treatment program while incarcerated. Obviously, this was a stellar program because within 7 months of being released, he not only committed another rape, but he also turned to murder. During this time, it was up to a parole officer's individual discretion of whether or not they told an employer about a criminal's past history. In December 1992, a new restaurant opened in Pittsburgh, Kansas. It was called Hamilton's. At that time, the employer was not running background checks on their employees. The monster applied for employment with this restaurant, but he failed to mention his criminal history or the fact that he was out on parole. And this monster's parole officer did not inform the restaurant either. The parole officer believed it was more important for this parolee to have a job and be self-supporting. And the restaurant didn't call any of his references either. He was hired as a dishwasher. And in December of 1992, Stephanie was hired at the restaurant as well. He claims that in February, he told his employer that he was out on parole and attending counseling. He said it was due to a bar fight. And he insisted that the other employees knew this about him as well. He also claimed that Stephanie was one of the employees that knew about his criminal history. But we can't ask Stephanie, so we are unsure whether this is true. But honestly, it is completely irrelevant because he lied. A bar fight and a previous rape conviction are two totally different things. Let's go back. Early July 1993. It was pretty apparent that Stephanie was with this monster when she disappeared, but he had already fled town. He called his mother on July 7th, and when she asked him, "Did you kill that Stephanie Schmidt girl?" he hung up the phone. He was on the run. Stephanie's case gained national attention. A beautiful, outgoing college student receives a ride from a convicted sex offender and then goes missing. On July 16th, Stephanie's story appeared on America's Most Wanted, and this monster watched his name and his face on this national TV program. He knew he was finished. He went to a payphone and turned himself in. He was in Florida. He stated that he saw himself on America's Most Wanted, and he knew he would be easily recognized. Stephanie was not with him. The hunt for this monster was over, but the hunt for Stephanie continued. He waived extradition to Kansas, and the Kansas authorities came and picked him up on July 23rd. When he arrived back in Kansas, they took him to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation's headquarters. He was asked by an investigator to help them find Stephanie. His exact words were, "Well, will you come back and see me the next day? I've got to think about it." The next day, he also said he couldn't do it. But then the following day, he waived his Miranda rights and spoke to them. He also asked for two things. Number one, he asked to speak with his mother because he didn't want her to hear his confession on the news. And number two, he claimed that he had a message for Stephanie's parents from her. He claimed that Stephanie had told him to tell her parents how much she loved them. Then he confessed. What follows is his version of events. Unfortunately, he killed the only witness, so Stephanie can't tell us what actually happened. I will leave out some of the details. I hadn't even heard some of these details until I began researching the case for this video. I read a ton of newspaper articles, and I even read the appeals paperwork. I will not give this monster the pleasure of releasing these details, but just know that he is truly a monster. Let's go back. June 30th. Remember, they were at the bar celebrating Stephanie's birthday. She wanted to go home, but her friends weren't ready to leave, and he offered to give her a ride home. So they headed to the parking lot and got in his truck. He claims that Stephanie said something about how nice he was and how she couldn't believe that he had been in prison and that he could ever hurt anyone. He then told Stephanie that he might be capable of hurting someone. As they were driving, Stephanie realized that he was not headed to her apartment. When she asked where he was going, he claims that he said that she could just get out of the truck. But she didn't. What was she supposed to do? Jump out of the pickup while he was driving down the road? What was he thinking? That this action would make him seem like a better person? Maybe in his own crazy mind. At one point, he said that she did grab for the door handle, but he stopped her. He drove down several secluded dirt roads in Cherokee County. I can't even imagine how scared Stephanie would have been. He claims he was in a rage. Why? What had made him turn into a rage? Did he try to make a pass at Stephanie and she refused? He admitted that he raped and sodomized Stephanie, and then somehow his rage was under control. Okay, we're leaving his confession again, and I have to talk about this. This monster learned something from his last rape. He knew that he couldn't leave a victim. He learned that Stephanie could easily go to the police, report him, and tell them exactly what he did and where he could be found. Plus, because he was a sexual offender, his DNA and blood was already in the database. So he had nothing to lose. He had to get rid of this witness. That was his only way of getting away with this crime, getting away with this rape. He said he had to work himself into another rage to be able to do what he had to next. This is where I will not continue to tell you about his bullshit confession. I do not believe a word he says. Needless to say, he strangled Stephanie and left her in a grassy area. He explained that after he fled Kansas, he headed to Oregon, and that's where he abandoned his truck. Most likely he headed to Canada to try to flee the country, but somehow he didn't make it through. So he obviously headed south because he ended up in Florida. Was he trying to get into Mexico and flee the country that way? On July 27th, 25 days after the family reported Stephanie missing, this monster led authorities to a field 10 miles southwest of Pittsburgh. They found the badly decomposed body of Stephanie. He was hoping that her body wouldn't be found for some time. Remember, because he was a convicted sex offender, his blood and DNA was in the database, and he knew it. He was hoping that her body would be there in that hot July weather for so long that all of the evidence would disappear, and he wouldn't be connected to the crime. The owner of the property where Stephanie's body was found took this photo later that night. It is absolutely beautiful. Needless to say, Stephanie's parents, Jean and Peggy, and her sister Jenny, were devastated. Losing a child or a sibling in any manner is awful, but this was totally different. He was charged with premeditated first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated sodomy, and rape. On October 6th of that same year, he waived his right to a trial and pleaded guilty on all 4 counts. During the sentencing proceedings on November 18, 1993, Jean, Peggy, and Jenny were allowed to give victim impact statements. The state did not offer these statements as evidence, but instead complied with the law that allowed these victims to make a statement. They had a right to say how their lives were affected when Stephanie was taken from them, and they also had a right to give their opinion with regards to punishment. The defense attorney objected multiple times, especially during Jenny's testimony. The objection was that this violated the defendant's right to confrontation. What did the defense attorney want to confront Jenny about? His objection also claimed that her testimony would influence the judge and influence sentencing. You're damn right it did, and it should. Because of this defendant, Stephanie was no longer able to speak for herself. That is what her family was allowed to do. That is the whole point of a victim impact statement. If the defendant doesn't like this, he shouldn't have offered her a ride. He shouldn't have driven her out to that field. He shouldn't have put her in fear of her life. He shouldn't have raped her. He shouldn't have murdered her. And he shouldn't have left her in that field. The victims' families absolutely have a right to say what this monster took from them. Because he took a lot. Because he was a previous sex offender and he shouldn't have been out of prison. He should be facing the death penalty. And he should never be allowed to do this to another woman. So many people were affected by Stephanie's murder. During the sentencing proceedings, Gene had put together a video of a bunch of photos of Stephanie. He was not allowed to show it to the judge. Part of Gene's victim impact statement was this: I cannot even show you a picture of Stephanie because it might create a potential technicality that would allow this criminal to continue to bob and weave his way through our legal system. When are we going to stop? Wake up and smell the carnage. We have to stop trying people on technicalities instead of actualities. Here is part of Peggy's statement. Our tears comes in waves daily, unknowingly, unannounced, and without any reason or stimulus. We would be looking forward to Thanksgiving and Christmas. Instead, our gatherings will be tinted with the sadness and emptiness. Although we cannot change the past, you have the opportunity to change the future. You can save the lives of others by keeping this man locked up for as long as possible. Stephanie's sister Jenny gave an absolutely amazing victim impact statement. I will read excerpts of it. Stephanie is not only my big sister, she is also my best friend. All my life, Stephanie stood by my side. She has always been there for me, to protect me, and do everything possible to help me out. I wish I could have been there that horrible night on July 1st. I wish I could have protected her somehow. So today, I would like to take this opportunity in the courtroom to help my sister. I no longer have any dreams to reach out to. I always dreamt of the day I would be Steph's bridesmaid, or the aunt of her children. Stephanie will not see me graduate from high school. She won't be there to help me through college. I no longer have my sister to call in the middle of the night for advice, or just a laugh to make me feel better. This horrible creature took Stephanie's life and mine. He destroyed our futures and our faith. Stephanie and I were both let down in faith of God, and most of all, our faith in the justice system. My dad always told us that the government was there to protect the innocent. Yet this so-called justice system was more concerned for the well-being of some immoral creature like the one who murdered my sister. Your Honor, I ask you to give me one last string of hope to hang on to. Please help restore my faith. Please make it so this coward never comes in contact with another Stephanie. Please do not let me down. On November 18th, he was given life imprisonment with a hard 40 for first-degree murder. That is a mandatory 40 years in prison. Finally, I will read you the rest of his sentence as well. He also got 408 months, which equal 34 years, for aggravated kidnapping, 154 months, which is almost 13 years, for aggravated sodomy, and 154 months, almost 13 years, for rape. The judge increased the sentence on the last 3 counts, sodomy, rape, and kidnapping, than what the sentencing guidelines calls for. The sentences will be served consecutively. Even if the defendant earns all his possible credits for good behavior, He will not be released until after his 119th birthday. If the judge hadn't increased the penalties, he would have been eligible for parole after his 96th birthday. By the grace of God, this monster will never be released. He will die in prison, and he deserves everything he gets. The judge gave 3 reasons of why he increased the penalties and went against the sentencing guidelines. The defendant subjected Stephanie to more pain and humiliation than most victims of these type of crimes. Number 1, he took advantage of Stephanie's trust. She just thought a coworker was taking her home. He knew that she would have absolutely no idea what would happen to her when she was alone with him. Number 2, Stephanie knew she was not going to survive. He put her through serious mental anguish. His actions were especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. Why else would she have asked this monster to tell her parents that she loved them? Number 3, this defendant would commit the same crime if he was given the chance. But this story doesn't end here. The monster's story does. He can rot away in a small, damp, cold, lonely prison cell. But Stephanie's story and her memory will continue to live on forever. Her family almost immediately started helping others. They turned their grief into something positive, and they helped change countless lives by changing so many laws. I will get into this and what we learned from Stephanie's story in my next video. Thank you for joining me here today. Remember to subscribe to my channel so you'll know when my next video is up. And follow me on social media so you can see what I am working on next. As always, have a wonderful day. Watch out for each other and keep looking for that missing link. Love ya, and see you in my next video.